Hello YouTube, and hello pressctrla, I believe that's your name. So, I just watched your video. It's entitled Atheists, Which elements on the periodic table have consciousness? Now, whenever I've seen this question, or I've seen this argument presented before. You see Frank Turek give a version of it, right? If it's all just molecules in motion, right? Um, and whenever I see this, I just think my head like explodes, right? So I can't help myself but make a response to this video, and specifically the question: which elements on the periodic table have consciousness? The answer, of course, is borium. I'm kidding. Now, the way consciousness works is a very, very rich and detailed subject. Right. The philosophy of mind goes back into history. What's called the mind-body problem goes back into history, right? So how this stuff works isn't totally settled, right? But the way I understand it is that we have to look at it in terms of levels of abstraction, right? So if I am looking at my computer and I move my mouse over and click a button, like watch a YouTube video, click a link, right? I just described an experience that I had interacting with a computer, right? And this described an interaction with the user interface at the application level of a computer, right? Now, I could describe that exact same process in terms of the code underneath, right? Um, whatever language, right? Now, I could describe that same process in terms of assembly language, right, or machine language. I could describe it in zeros and ones, right. I could even describe it at the level of hardware and talk about precisely what transistors are being turned on and off within the microprocessor, right. You could there are these different layers of abstraction, all of which describe the same event, right? Now, the brain is something works in a similar way, at least as I understand it, right? So I see the color green, right? And that experience of seeing the color green, right? I can articulate as in I see the color green, right? Um, and that's sort of fine, right? Now, you could also go into the visual cortex of my brain and map out the neurological activity and associate that activity with the color green, right? In principle. You could do this with a different person. You might get a slightly different map, right? I mean, brains are pretty plastic. They're not objects that are static. Now, you could also describe that neurological activity as being the interplay of molecules, right? Or the interplay of atoms, if you like, right? And what you find is that these are different levels of abstraction. Now, the trouble is that when you get down to the level of atoms, right, that description becomes so complex and unwieldy that it's virtually impossible to get a grip on. Now, that doesn't mean that in principle me seeing the color green can't be explained at the level of atoms interacting with each other. But, right, at the level of atoms interacting with each other, the color green doesn't exist, right? in the same way that at the level of the microprocessor, a hyperlink doesn't exist. The microprocessor understands ones and zeros. A hyperlink is an abstraction of something much higher up, right, in this chain. So what you find is, as you build upwards, or as you describe downwards, which is, I think, more realistically the case, what you find is that different layers of abstraction have different sort of rules associated with them, right? But it's not, and we call this emergence, right? Emergent complexity. So the brain does things that you can't understand at the level of atoms, right? Particularly individual atoms, or particularly individual elements, right? The brain just doesn't work like that, right? It's not atoms, right? It's atoms interacting to constitute cells, right? And it's cells interacting with one another in various patterns. Blah, 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 blah. And then, therefore, the brain produces a model of the world, and we call that modeling process consciousness, right? I think I'm sort of fine with that. Now, what's clearly not the case, nobody thinks that consciousness is something that is appropriately understood as by looking at the periodic table in and of itself, right? This is a clear straw man, right? And the fact of the matter is that, like, I find myself coming back to this trope again and again in my thinking. If you want to do a video in public challenging how atheists come to grips with the question of consciousness, which is a really interesting and fascinating and manifold sort of question. If you want to do that video, and if you want to put it out into public, fine. But do your homework, right? Like, spend some time with some philosophers of mind. Spend some time learning about neurology. Spend some time learning about emergent complexity, okay? Because it's one thing to say, I don't see how, atoms can constitute minds, right? It's one thing to say that. It's a completely different thing to present that as an argument, like a knockdown argument. If you want to know how people describe that process, there's plenty of resources out there for you to go and peruse, right? The fact of the matter is, like the question itself betrays an incredible, and please forgive this language, I try to be a polite person, but it betrays an incredible kind of ignorance about the subject that you are using, like, as a premise, right? Like, it's something that you're using as taking, like, as something obvious, right? Do your homework, right? Learn about the subject before you open your mouth about it in public and present it as an argument. So yeah, have a good day.